Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the fifth and final talk in the Museum of the Order of St John's first ever series of online talks. My name is Sarah Duthie and I'm Director of Priory and International Affairs, and I'm really pleased to introduce this evening's event as we all come together from our homes across the country and across the globe. Now, to introduce tonight's guest speaker. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Ahmad this evening for the first part of our event. Dr. Marley joined the St John Eye Hospital Group in 1990 as a student nurse, cementing his education at Al-Quds University, Greenwich University, and then the Moorfields Eye Hospital. He was also awarded a PhD from De Montfort University in 2017. He became head of the School of Nursing in 2001 and in 2009 became the first Palestinian nursing director. Dr. Marley was appointed joint CEO of the St John of Jerusalem Eye Hospital Group in October 2017 and has been a standalone CEO since June 2019. This evening, we will learn about the historic foundations of the Eye Hospital and the achievements and challenges faced by his expert team today. Welcome, Dr. Marley, and over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and good evening, everybody. And thank you, Sarah, and your team for organizing this meeting and for giving me this opportunity to talk about the work of the Eye Hospital and, of course, to join you this evening for this online museum talk. In the next 15 to 20 minutes, I would like to give the audience a brief introduction about the history of the hospital. And also, I would like to talk about the impact of the hospital on the lives of the people we serve here in Jerusalem and also in Gaza and in the West Bank. I would like to highlight some of the challenges the hospital has been facing, especially over the last 12 months or so with COVID-19. Yes, I think the first slide just shows the sites that the hospital is operating from. As you can see from the title that we are now called the St. John of Jerusalem Eye Hospital Group. So the mother hospital is the hospital that I am speaking from, which is in East Jerusalem. We have a hospital, a day hospital in Gaza as well. And we have a center in the north of the West Bank called the Anabta Eye Care Center. We have the hospital in Hebron, is a day hospital. And of course, we have the Muristan Primary Eye Care Clinic. We have recently opened another clinic outside the wall called the Kufr Aqab Clinic. And of course, the mobile outreach clinic that travels up and down the country. Next, please. St. John of Jerusalem Eye Hospital Group. The hospital was established in 1882. On direct orders from Her Majesty Queen Victoria to eliminate blindness in the in Jerusalem, and mainly a disease at the time was called trachoma. We have been, or we are going to celebrate next year 140 years of charitable eye care in the Holy Land. On this current site in Sheikh Jarrah, we have been functioning and working for almost 60 years now. We remain to be the main provider of eye care and the main referral center for complex surgery and tertiary treatment for patients, for almost 5 million patients in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. Next, please. Our mission has not changed much, actually, since we were established. Our mission, we exist as a center of excellence that provides, or now we have become centers of excellence that provide quality eye care, quality care that is relevant, quality care that is given to the most needy people, and also care that is provided to the people who need it, regardless of their race, creed, and social class, as well as their ability to pay for the services. Next, please. Our vision, we strive to eliminate all avoidable causes of blindness in the Holy Land. We also strive to affirm our leadership in the provision of quality eye care and of course education for healthcare providers in the Holy Land, mainly in East Jerusalem, Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. Next, please. As for any hospital, we have our own strategic plan. Our 3 years strategic plan has 5 strategic objectives. And the first objective focuses on the provision of patient-centered services, services that are of high quality, services that maintain patient safety and ensure that the best treatment is provided to our patient. The second strategic aim for the coming 3 years focuses on our staff. Our staff are our most important asset, and therefore we always try and employ the most caring and most skilled people. And of course, our aim is to care for these people and invest in them and look after them. The third strategic aim of the hospital is to ensure sustainability of our funding and also sustainability of our service. This is essential because we are a charitable eye care provider. The fourth objective is that as a good hospital which implements the best standards available, we also ensure good governance and enhance our partnerships with people locally and internationally. And the fifth objective is that we deliver excellent education, research, and innovation for the people we serve in this part of the world. Next, please. Our staff, we employ close to 260, sometimes 70 staff. These staff, as I mentioned earlier, they operate from 7 sites, 1 hospital in Jerusalem, 1 hospital in Gaza, 1 hospital in Hebron, a center in the north of the West Bank, 2 primary eye care clinics, 1 in the old city of Jerusalem in the Muristan, and 1 outside the wall, and of course the mobile outreach clinic. We employ 44 doctors, 90 nurses, 38 allied health professions, and 43 admin staff, as well as 46 support services staff. Next, please. We now come to the impact of the work we do here in this part of the world. We perform all types of surgeries, almost all types of eye surgeries. Last year, for example, we performed 5,700 surgeries. These are major eye surgeries. These are sight-saving eye surgeries. And if we look at the impact of the work that we have done over the last 10 years, we performed more than 54,000 sight-saving operations. I'd like to believe, and I firmly believe, that we have managed to restore the vision for most, if not all, of these patients. Next, please. With regards to outpatient care, we, of course, last year, because of COVID-19, there was a slight drop in the number of outpatients that we were able to serve. We managed to treat more than 105,000 patients, a slight drop of about 17 to 20% from the year before. But if we look at the last 10 years, we at the various hospital sites dealt with more than 1.3 million outpatient visits. Now, it's very important to mention a little bit about the customers, if you like, or the beneficiaries. We treat patients who come to the doors of St. John regardless. So we have Israeli patients, so patients who have Israeli insurance or medical insurance, or they are Israeli citizens, mainly in Jerusalem. We also treat patients from the West Bank. These are mainly Palestinians. And the most important thing what we do here is that we look after all the refugees So all the refugees in the West Bank and some of the refugees in Gaza seek eye care at the hospital. It's very important to say that almost 80% of the people who live in Gaza have a refugee status, and these patients live really on daily handouts or monthly handouts from the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Next, please. Very important to mention the impact of our work with regards to the mobile outreach. We have a team of doctors and nurses who travel on daily basis, and they provide eye care to patients in most isolated and disadvantaged parts in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The focus is mainly on, as I said, the refugee camps, women's centers, and centers that provide care for disabled people. Last year, because of the COVID-19 and restrictions on movement, we managed to treat close to 7,000 patients. But if we look at the work that we have done over the last 10 years, almost 176,000 patients have received very much needed eye care through the mobile outreach service. The mobile outreach, I mean, not every service is available on the for the team, and therefore the patients are either treated on the site or they are referred to one of our satellite centers or clinics or even to the hospital in Jerusalem. Next, please. As I said, our staff are the most important, precious asset for us. Some of our staff stay with us for 30, 40, even sometimes more than that. And therefore, capacity building is a very important part of what we do here in this in Jerusalem and also in the West Bank. We are a teaching hospital, and therefore we teach nurses who are qualified general nurses, and they become after their training, they become ophthalmic nurses. We treated more than 200 nurses in the last 10 years. And we also are teaching hospital for doctors. So doctors join us for 4 years. They are general practitioners. Once they finish their training, they become ophthalmologists, and they are eligible to sit for international exams to get certification for their work. Very important to say that we do not we do not teach for the needs of the hospital only, but also we teach staff, doctors and nurses and others for the community. Many of our graduates do not stay with us, but they go back to their communities. And this is also an additional, if you like, charitable arm, an extension of the arm of the hospital to serve the communities. Next, please. As I mentioned, we strive to be the leaders, and I believe that we are the leaders in the provision of eye care in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, as well as Gaza. And we are also leading education and training. Research is an area that we have also been focusing on. There are a number of research projects that are taking place at the hospital at the moment, mainly clinical research in areas of uveitis, glaucoma, and retinal disease. We have partnerships with various universities, both local universities. We also work with the Hadassah Hospital, where we have a retinal genetics research in partnership with the Hadassah Hospital. And we are also, some of our doctors also work internationally, mainly with Moorfields Eye Hospital. Next, please. Our partners, we have many partners. Some of our partners are local partners. So we have a good relationship with the Palestinian Ministry of Health, where they send their patients over to us to treat. We are also have an excellent relationship with the Hadassah Medical Center, which is really mainly the ophthalmic side of the hospital. We have international partners. Our international partners are many, but I'm only mentioning here few. We have good partnership with the European Union. We work with our partners in Australia, the Fred Hollows Foundation. We also work with BMZ in Germany. And a very important partner we work with here is the UNRWA, which is the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, that provides really a care for people in who have refugee status, mainly in the Gaza Strip. Next, please. I don't think we can finish this presentation without talking about COVID-19 and the impact of COVID-19 on the hospital. We are like any part of the world. We have been affected by COVID-19 last year. Unfortunately, the situation remains similar this year, but how the COVID-19 crisis affected the hospital. It's very important to note that 45% of our income that we generate from patients, this 45% of the budget that we make to run the hospital is dependent on the income that we receive from patients, most of the time from the insurers of the patients. So from either the Palestinian Ministry of Health Insurance, or the Israeli Ministry of Health. So with 3 waves of COVID-19, we just finished actually in Jerusalem about maybe a month and so ago with the last phase. But in the Palestinian areas, we are in the middle of a 3rd phase. This has resulted in lockdown and restriction of movement, restrictions on movement of patients and everybody, and therefore for about 3-4 months, patients were not able to reach the hospital, or not all patients were able to reach the hospital. And as a result of that, there was a reduction of almost 17% in the outpatient numbers, but only 0.5% reduction in major surgical activities last year. Next, please. So as management, we were all surprised by the COVID-19 crisis, and there was no textbook to go back to and find how we are going to deal with this situation. And therefore, we had really to improvise and work hard to overcome the clinical and financial difficulties we all faced. So we worked hard really in Jerusalem to increase and also in London, to increase our income. And our voluntary income. We worked hard at the whole group to reduce our costs and enhance our efficiencies. We unfortunately had to reduce our payroll cost, and we had to work closely with the authorities to ensure safe passages of patients, especially patients who were due to have surgery at the hospital. All of this actually has enabled us to reach the year end with a more positive financial figures than first anticipated, and also enabled us to sustain our services. The most important thing that we maintain the safety of our patients, and we maintain the safety of our staff. And that is really, I would say that's really a very important achievement despite all the difficulties that we all have faced. Next, please. This is a table, or this table shows our financial statement for 2020. Looking at the incoming resources, you can see that 44% of our incoming resources are from patient-related income. As I said, these are not only from patient direct payment, but this will be patients' insurers, both Israeli Ministry of Health and also the Palestinian. Priority income, we have the same joint priorities who have always been very generous, and last year were very generous as well, and they contributed 19% of our budget. Other voluntary income from both the team is working in Jerusalem and in Gaza, and in London. We made 35% of our budget. We spend 93% of the money that we generate on charitable eye care and charitable activities within the group. Next, please. So forward look, what I would like to achieve, or we'd like to achieve this year. The most important thing, I think, is really to deal with the backlog of patients who have not been able to reach us, especially outpatients, because the number of surgical patients was equivalent almost to the year before. But we are aware of patients who were not able to reach us because of movement restrictions, and patients were not really keen to travel because of the COVID-19. And therefore, we would like to work in partnership with mainly the Palestinian Ministry of Health or the Palestinian Authority. This is where the backlog of patients is. And we've already started to do that and deal with the backlog of patients. And if a patient, for example, a diabetic patient who needs to have an injection or needs to have a laser treatment, and he has not or she has not been able to reach the hospital, they are at risk of losing their sight if we do not reach them. And therefore, we have plans, or we started the plans to reach those patients through various mechanisms, including the outreach and opening a clinic also outside the wall. The second relationship I would like, or would like to enhance, is with the Israeli Sick Fund. Last year, we managed to increase the number of patients who are from the Israeli Sick Fund. And this year, we would like to capitalize on that and also enhance that relationship and increase the number of patients who are Israelis or with Israeli Sick Fund status and who come to the hospital. Next, please. Oh, that's the last one. Okay. Well, I think this is the end of my presentation. And again, thank you, Sarah, and your team for giving me this marvelous opportunity. And I would like to leave this presentation with an open invitation to all our audience who might be visiting or happen to visit Jerusalem after COVID-19. And I would like to welcome them to the hospital and to show them firsthand the impact of the hospital on the lives of so many disadvantaged people in this part of the world. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Ahmed, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And I know we are all really looking forward to the 140th anniversary and the celebrations that you're going to be having in 2022. And it's an incredible achievement. I mean, your financial situation last year is an incredible achievement, and everything you've talked about, including the outreach work and the training for people that can then go back and offer those services to people with eye problems back in their community, is incredible, and just highlights the importance of that funding for you. The slide you showed about the outreach work, it obviously dipped quite a bit in the last year or so. How hopeful are you that can start to increase again this year, as I know that obviously cases in Israel are going?
Yes, I mean, mainly it's the lockdown problems. So the lockdown is much better. The COVID-19 situation, as you know, Sarah, is better in Israel. But also the second reason was that in Gaza, we had to stop outreach for about 6 months due to funding problems. Thank God this problem is now being sorted out, and then the team is back on the road seeing more patients. I expect that we will reach around 12 to 15,000 patients this year.
Goodness, okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so important, and I'm lucky enough to have been to visit you, Ahmed, at the Eye Hospital in Jerusalem and seen your work, and it is incredible. And I would urge people, if you get the opportunity, and thank you for the generous invitation, if you do get the opportunity to go, because it is really incredible to see the work that's going there, and I'm a definite supporter of your work. And in the chat here, we've got Jeremy, who said congratulations on your work and thank you for sharing. Glad to hear the order supports your important work. So thank you very much, Jeremy, and great, thank you so much.
Thank you,
are you going to stay with us, Ahmed?
Yes, I am, if you don't mind.
Excellent, we'd love you to stay. Thank you.
I will stay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. And move on to the second part of our evening today. Now, in 2016, the Eye Hospital Group embarked on a creative venture with renowned sculptor Mark Coreth. The result was a beautiful and thought-provoking work of art in bronze. Described as a beacon of hope, a gnarled and ancient olive tree bustling with majestic swifts stands proudly in the Muristan Clinic Garden. For the second part of this event, we're delighted to hear from the sculptor himself, speaking in an exclusive pre-recorded conversation with Dr. Matthew Glosier. Mark Coreth is an internationally acclaimed artist. The life-size sculpture of Frankel at Royal Ascot, unveiled by Her Majesty the Queen, is among his work. He can count many of the royal family, as well as the Natural History Museum in London, amongst his collectors. Dr. Matthew Glosier is the Honorary Archivist for St John Ambulance Australia in New South Wales, and one of the 3 expert authors of an upcoming book on the history of the St John of Jerusalem Eye Hospital Group, and that will be released next year.
Good evening, Mark. Very good of you to join me for this interview and talk about your work and talk about the Eye Hospital in Jerusalem. We both have an interesting relationship with that Eye Hospital for various reasons, both of them creative, I'm happy to say. And I think the broader picture here is broadcasting the work of the hospital and its history and the extent of its connection to the region over a significant amount of time. So I've prepared a few questions that you might be kind enough to consider and to respond to. And certainly, I think this should be more a discussion than a question and answer back and forward mechanically. So I think we should feel free to range freely. But there are a few things that I'm interested to know. And I thought perhaps the logical starting point would be for each of us to introduce ourselves and say something about what we do and who we are and what our relationship to the Eye Hospital is. Would you like to go first?
Thank you very much indeed, and very good to meet you across the airways, as distant a time as we seem to be. Yes, who am I? I'm a sculptor. I'm a wildlife sculptor. I was born and bred in East Africa, Kenya. I was educated there and then in England. I went to Sandhurst. I joined the Household Cavalry and served with them for 15 years, in which time I taught myself to sculpt. But I think what I also did was in that time learn to keep one's eyes wide open. One learned to really to draw in everything that you see and understand, and one learned to explore. One learned to adventure, and also, I guess, to leadership and so on. So where does that get me? Yes, I taught myself to sculpt while I was soldiering, and 15 years in the British Army, one had quite a bit of interesting experience, but it was just a complete passion of wanting to work in 3 dimensions and to sculpt that really drew me forward. And so I taught myself as a soldier, I taught myself to sculpt in bronze, 3 dimensions. Africa is 3 dimensions. The skies, the wide open vistas, the clouds, the wildlife, it's all magnificent 3 dimensions. It's people, it's wildlife, it's amazing education just to see it. And in a way, that's how I began to take my sort of sculptural direction. I wanted to, in my sculpture, use my sculpture to talk about things that I experience. It's not just simply a image of an animal or something. It's for something far more in depth somehow. And the more I did, the more I got involved in it, the more I began to understand my sort of sculptural dreams, the more I realized that I needed to actually get out and talk about and use this sort of 3-dimensional journalism in a way. And I think that's not unfair to say, because I think an exhibition, once you've studied an area or a beast or an ecosystem for a couple of years, the exhibition you produce is ultimately three-dimensional journalism, because you're talking about the passions, the people, the wildlife, the environment, the strengths, the weaknesses, the whole thing comes together as a package. And as such, the whole development of a commission, and when we go to talk about what we've been doing in Jerusalem, that is really how what was ultimately a fairly small, simple idea turned into something far, far bigger. Passionate naturalist, passionate sculptor. Yes, that's who I am.
I love the idea of sort of three-dimensional storytelling and capturing those narratives in your creations. And obviously, your eyes are wide open, both for the stories and for the experiences. And that resonates with me particularly because, of course, my background is as a historian, and that is explicitly about people and their choices, and the broader contextual factors that help shape the worlds that they live in. So in a sense, we're not a million miles apart, I guess, in terms of what we're creating in relation to our careers and the eye hospital itself. As you know, I'm one of 3 authors who are writing the official history of the eye hospital over its 140-year history, and that's 3 locations essentially over 140 years, and really hundreds of thousands of local patients who've been positively affected by the hospital, and all of that is captured in both of our artistic creations. I think we've both achieved that in terms of the stories that we're telling. It does make me interested, though, what you knew about the eye hospital before you got involved with it, with your specific project.
Yes, it's interesting that, because I'm a Catholic. One's always known, one's whole Jerusalem has always been part of one's life. I've known about the eye hospital for a long time. When I say I've known about it, I knew about it almost tangentially before I got involved. I'd known about the Order of St. John, I'd known about their sort of history, but somehow until you get out there and see it, it only gets into one's soul when you get there to see it physically for yourself. It was Tom Ogilvy Graham, who was the CEO at the hospital in 2016, and he called me and just said, "Look, join me for lunch and let's sort of meet up." And I knew Tom way back in the army when he was a vet at the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment. So that's when I got to know him. But when I got to talk to him and he began to describe what the eye hospital is all about, then those little things of, yes, but I know about that, but it then it really became a big. That's when the focus really started to come together, and I realized how little I knew about it. I didn't know that much, but when Tom said, "Look, Muristan," I thought, Muristan, I don't know where's Muristan? Heart of the city of Jerusalem. And the whole thing he began to paint the picture, and yes, nuggets came together, but it's only when he said, "Look, I've got a thought I want you to think about. I've got this idea, I want this garden I want to try and develop into a clinic." And the garden as a place for pilgrims to come to and patients to recover and so on. And he began to describe where it was that I realized actually how very little I knew about Jerusalem and about the Order of St. John in actual fact. But
I greatly admire the humility of that statement, and I can recognize so much of what you're saying. Mark, because I've just finished work on a very local St John history of New South Wales, St John Ambulance. And like so many elements of St John, we fund a nurse. We funded 3 historically at the hospital. So I'd been writing about it and I knew something about it before this major project came along. But actually, as you rightly say, once you peel back those layers, you realize how little you actually know in detail, and the connections only come with that further investigation. So that's a wonderful story. And I was going to ask you next why you were keen to work with the Eye Hospital. I think you've partly answered that already. Yeah.
I think I have partly answered. Tom was a great friend I hadn't seen actually for a number of years. And he threw this little nugget in to me, and just said that he wanted to develop this garden as a recovery garden pilgrimage place, heart of Jerusalem, and he wanted a bit of sculpture in the middle, and it was really just a suggestion that I might come do or produce a bit of sculpture that would. It had to tell the history of Jerusalem, the history of the history of Jerusalem from the year dot, the peoples that moved through Jerusalem, the walls. It had to tell the story of the Eye Hospital. It had to tell the story of. I mean, what it had to tell was something, frankly, almost impossible to put together in a bit of sculpture. But so I scratched my head, and before he suggested, I had a full head of hair. But the more I scratched my head, the bolder I became. But he then said, "Look, have you been to Jerusalem?" And I said, "No." He said, "Would you like to go to Jerusalem?" And I said, "Absolutely. It's one of the places I must go to." And so he said, "Well, look, come out." And it was February 2016. And he took me into. Oh, he took me as a start to Sheikh Jarrah to the Eye Hospital. And when one went there, one thought, my gosh, and you saw the people working there, and you saw what they were doing, you just this zing came about you. And then he took me to the old city, within the walls, within that extraordinary history of Jerusalem. But when you go, he then took me into the garden in Muristan, which at this stage was just a ex-volleyball pitch. It was rubble, and it had been in the care of the Lutheran Church for some time, but it had come back to the order, and Tom wanted to make a clinic in the corner of the garden, an eye clinic. But the magic of that is it's in the heart of the old city of Jerusalem, and he took me onto the roof of the building, which was very tumble down at that stage. And you look down, you look across to the Mount of Olives, you look across the Garden of Gethsemane, that golden dome just there, Western Wall just over here, Holy Sepulchre just behind us. And he just took me to that spot, and I looked at it, I looked down onto the pile of rubble where this garden was to be, and I was standing on where the clinic was to be, and I was completely in awe at what I was seeing. And as a sculptor, yes, I was being invited to put a bit of sculpture down there, and that was fantastic. But when I looked at it, I just thought, you know what, this is not a place to just make a bit of sculpture willy-nilly. It was a thing, it instantly became something that was far bigger than I could ever do. It was something, the mission was far bigger than Tom imagined it to be, because we were absolutely, we got the, as I say, the Garden of Gethsemane in front of us. Mount of Olives, we all know about that. The Golden Dome, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Western Wall of the Temple, the Holy Sepulchre behind us, the Church of St. John just immediately behind it. And it was just so completely something that was a unique place, and probably the most important place to put a bit of sculpture that would draw people together. So for me, it became something that was so vital that I do something that was completely non-commercial. Nothing, I could not make, I would not, I threw away instantly the chance of you know, paying one's daily bread with it. It was something that had to be totally and utterly philanthropic. It had to be something that would draw these peoples together, the Abrahamic faiths together. And so from that instant, it became something far bigger than Tom imagined and I imagined. And I just didn't quite know where on earth it was taking me, and what I was going to do with it, how I was going to tackle this commission.
And look, if I may say, I think the concept of it as a gift to the order and to Jerusalem, it really does resonate, because that's one of the reasons I think we're talking today, is because that broader story really does contribute to that longer history of the philanthropy of the Eye Hospital, rather wonderfully, in fact. And now might be the appropriate time to invite you to talk about the Swifts sculpture that you've created. I think you've got one of the small standalone ones there with you, which are wonderful. They're substantial items in themselves, and I think quite beautiful. But you've also produced the Peace Garden tree, which is a huge collection of all of these swifts in flight, but also well anchored to the ground. And yet there's that wonderful feeling of lightness about all of that within that garden, which really does sort of lift the soul. I wonder if I could invite you to talk about maybe the thoughts behind that creation, and even the creation process, if that's relevant.
I would love to. It is relevant. It's very relevant as far as I'm concerned. Going back just to the Peace Garden as in itself, it is extraordinary to think, really, the fragility of Jerusalem and the pressures within the politics and the religious frictions, and the way the order has managed to hold that together. It's not without its problems, but my gosh, it's a dream that is something that needs to be allowed to mature, and I pray that it fulfills its aim. Its aim is to bring people together and to give a garden of, as you say, peace. But we're dealing with Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is a very fragile city. The order has brought that garden together in a wonderful way. They asked me to make a sculpture that would tell the history of Jerusalem, the movement of people, the dynamic movement of people, to give a message of hope. That was a very important part of the mission. And as I was describing earlier, standing on the roof of the clinic, looking out over the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane, the Golden Dome, the Lexham Mosque, the Western Wall just there, and Holy Sepulchre just here. You're in the heart of where the Abrahamic faiths really come together. And even as we speak every day, and the Pope now is going to Iraq to talk and to bring people together under the banner of Abraham. This is such an important thing. And back in 2016, when this idea that Tom threw at me, it is so important. So what could I do? How could I fulfill this mission? I walked every inch of the city of Jerusalem, and I went down to the Garden of Gethsemane. I drove practically all around the Holy Land. Everywhere I went, I saw the olive tree. It's such an important tree to every man, every person, everyone there, all faiths. It is equal to everyone. You go down to the Garden of Gethsemane, you look at those trees over 2,000 years old, and you just think, we know who sat under those trees. It is just quite extraordinary. And yet you've got this knackered, gnarled, dead wood amongst those trees, and yet what is there? There's young growth coming up through it. There's fruit, there's leaves, there's life, there's hope in that tree. And so the more I looked at them, I thought, you know, that city just up there, the knackered, gnarled walls of Jerusalem are very similar to the trunk of this olive tree. So there I thought, okay, that's point number one. The olive tree is going to be my walls of Jerusalem. That is going to be the core of the sculpture. So I wanted to make a bronze olive tree. Fine. I then thought, how do I model a bronze olive tree? I then thought, well, actually, you know what? Funny enough, the good Lord is a darn sight better sculptor than I will ever be. And so I then thought, well, maybe I should just mold one of the olive trees that an old olive tree. I couldn't mold one in Garden Assembly because that was just a bit too bold. But I spoke this particular part through with Tom, and he said, look, there's a garden down in Tantor, which belongs to the Order of Malta. They've got some wonderful old olive trees. Let's go and see those. And I found one which I just fell in love with, which I thought, that's my tree. And so molding the tree was one thing. Yes. How do I mold it? Who do I get? I thought, I want to get people of all the Abrahamic faiths involved in this. I found a foundry, a bronze foundry in Netanya, an Israeli foundry. Fine. I went down to see them. I persuaded them to come and take part in this thing. This is underneath the walls of Bethlehem, so it's quite an imposing position. And yep, they came and molded. We had Palestinians from Jerusalem and from Bethlehem and the Jewish people from the Israeli foundries. We had me, a Christian. We had all the Abrahamic faiths working, molding this one tree together. And one of the Israelis came to me after and said, I've never worked with a Palestinian before, and we got on so well together. So it was beginning to work already. Through Tom, we got a wonderful man, Michael Dan, Canadian, Jewish Canadian, sponsored us to create this sculpture. So we had a Jew sponsor it for a Christian organization, the Order of St. John, which works predominantly for the Palestinians, predominantly for the Muslim faith. So it was a wonderful synergy coming together. And so that's the tree, but so converting the tree into bronze, yeah, we made almost a print of this tree, which is still very much up at Tantor and is a very alive tree, and it will be alive for hopefully thousands of years yet. But when I looked at the olive tree as a whole, you got this the fruit, yes, the leaves, yes, hope, yes, life, yes. But when you think of the dynamic movement, you're a historian, I'm a historian, I'm sure you're a far better historian than I am, but the life of people, the history of Jerusalem, the movement of people, the comings and goings, the pilgrims, it was more, I needed more dynamics. And I happened to be there in February, March, which is when the swift flies in. The swift has been recorded as nesting in the walls of the temple, and from the early days, from the first temple, and it's been recorded as such. The swift has been part of Jerusalem from the very outset, and every year the migration of swifts come in. They nest in the western wall, they nest in all the holy sites. All the Abrahamic faiths have swifts nesting with them, and they come in, they migrate they nest, they breed, they then migrate back to sub-Saharan Africa. It's a movement, a wonderful movement of nature that is coming together in the heart of Jerusalem. And to me, it was like the pilgrims coming back every year, people coming in and going. And so I decided that these were going to be my canopy of my tree. And so I made 150 odd swifts, just like this, winging their way from the tree. So that from the heart of this tree, with it, I made bronze roots. That's the other thing I did, which you can't see. I made bronze, which go into the heart of the city of Jerusalem. And it comes up through the trunk of the tree, out through the boughs, and then explodes out through these swifts, away from the tree. On the side of the walls of Muristan, I've got groups of 3 swifts flying. 3 very important. And over in the Sheikh Jarrah, I've got, across the walls there, I've got groups of 3 swifts flying. I flagged my way into Gaza and put 3 swifts up the walls of their hospital. And we've now got swifts in London, groups of 3. Why 3? Because these are the Abrahamic faiths flying together. It's my prayer flag that people and nature fly together. We've got in Jerusalem, that heart of Jerusalem, got this explosion coming out through this olive tree, and basically these swifts are flying out and out and out and out and out. This particular one I've just had cast is going up to Scotland. Why? It's going up to the kirk where Sir Malcolm Ross is buried, and Sir Malcolm was the Lord Prior, and he was very much behind my whole project. And so this is, it's him, it's his energy, it's all of these swifts that fly out are energy bringing people together in one solid mission of hope and mutual respect. So now we've got swifts practically, not in big enough numbers yet, but all around the world. I've not got them in Antarctica. That is a point I must work on, that one, but never mind, I'll get there in the end. But the other thing I did, when I say I did, we must remember this sculpture is made by so many people, all the foundry boys, all members of the 3 Abrahamic faiths. Wonderful chap called Amnon Han, who I got to know very well out there, who's a big Swift expert. He and I put Swift boxes up around the walls of Muristan. We've got 15 boxes. What have we now got? We've got families of Swifts in that magical 100 days are coming in and nesting in those boxes and winging their way around the tree. They are the live Swift, but what are they? They're part of the sculpture. And every year they will migrate back down to the south. They'll then come back. Their chicks will be finding boxes, nesting, breeding. They're all part of the same sculpture. I want everyone who goes out, when, it's fairly soon, we'll have the swallows, house martins coming back here in the UK, fairly soon thereafter the swifts. They are all part, in my mind, of this whole message, this whole energy.
And I'm particularly touched by the Order of Malta origin for the tree. I think this is wonderful to take it back through Tantur, their own hospital project in the Holy Land, take it back to the Muristan. This is a wonderful resonance between the Alliance Orders of St. John. The only other thing, Mark, I could think to ask you in this interview was what observations, advice, guidance, would you feel it appropriate to give anyone else who found themselves involved in a similar connection with the Eye Hospital on some kind of artistic creation like this?
Well, I think there's, and I remember I remember different projects altogether that I was involved in, that I did, which was up in the Arctic, polar bears and climate change and one thing another. But I remember having a scientist up there saying, look, we are scientists, we are the ones that research polar bears and sea ice and so on and so forth, and we write scientific papers and we can record it in a scientific way and so on. But most people who read our papers will fall asleep in their soup. Whereas the arts can tell the same story in a way that will engage people and to a much wider audience. And I think that is very true. And in a way, it goes back to the hospital when you see those extraordinary people going out every day to look after eyes, children, old people, and so on, every day. They are just the most extraordinary people. And yet, the artist, and I can't do their job. There's no way I can do their job. And the amount of respect and the humility when you look at what they're doing is extreme. But nonetheless, an artist can tell a story in a way that other people can draw other people in. So, you know, I think the arts are, I mean, just poetry can draw people in, the written word can draw people in, paintings can inspire the imagination, music. When you look at that extraordinary and Daniel Barenboim, who with the orchestra that he's brought together, and the extraordinary resonance that brings to people. The arts can tell a story. We are all part of the same team. That as an artist, you needn't be a doctor to be part of the team in St. John. You can be a sculptor, you can be a poet, you can just simply talk, you can write an essay, you can raise money, you can tell the story of St. John. Artists can do that in a way that maybe those extraordinary doctors and nurses can't, because they've got their own areas of responsibility. So we can all be part of it.
I think that's such a good way to finish, in fact, isn't it? As a statement, because so much is given to the Eye Hospital group by so many, and obviously a lot of them are medical personnel, but many more are not. And I think it's that broader, diverse diaspora of support which is so important to maintaining the hospital. That's certainly part of its history over 140 years, but it's so refreshing to see it continue and so obviously be so obviously visible in your work. So Mark, it's been a pleasure and an honour to talk to you today in person. It's the first time we've talked directly, so it's fantastic. But for today, thank you, and let's continue this discussion over time. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And I feel very privileged that you've asked me along to talk about it.
Well, what an incredible interview, and thank you to Matthew and to Mark for that, and thank you to all of you for joining us tonight for this interview. We're really pleased to be able to offer this series of talks, and we've done it thanks to funding from the Arts Council England through their Culture Recovery Grant. Thank you very much for joining us, and good evening.